Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm joined by Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, Minister of Energy and Minerals, Brian Jean, and Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf. On October the 4th, we announced that we were prepared to return to court if the federal government did not provide a satisfactory response to our concerns. We gave them a 4-week deadline, but we have not received a response from Ottawa, so we are here today to announce that we will continue in our efforts to defend Alberta from Ottawa's unconstitutional overreach within our jurisdiction. We are once again taking Ottawa to court for their deeply flawed and unconstitutional legislation. We filed our reference case at the Alberta Court of Appeal, earlier this morning. The Prime Minister should know better by now than to think that we are bluffing. And we're confident that we are once again on the right side of this legal challenge. You'll recall that in 2023, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Impact Assessment Act was largely unconstitutional. The federal government promised to amend the Act to comply with the Constitution and push these amendments through Parliament this spring. Their amendments contain some clever word games, but still ultimately gave the federal government control over projects that fall under Alberta's exclusive jurisdiction. In October, I sent a letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau informing him that the amendments his government made to the Impact Assessment Act did nothing to address Alberta's concerns, and they didn't live up to the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling that upheld provincial jurisdiction over the natural resources within our borders. My letter included a list of proposed amendments that would adequately address our concerns. They included eliminating federal encroachment into Alberta's jurisdiction, allowing provincial environmental assessments to be considered equivalent to federal ones, imposing concrete approval timelines to give investors more certainty. These amendments were proposed in good faith, with the aim of reaching a solution that would work for the provinces and for the federal government alike. The federal government would be able to save their side and ours a lot of time and effort if they trusted provinces to manage their own affairs. We've been managing ours very well for a lot of years now, and all of the proof that you need of that is the environmental track record of our key industries, which operate in close proximity to our pristine wilderness. Our government will always defend Alberta's constitutionally protected jurisdiction and our right to develop our natural resources on our terms. This fight has largely been legalese so far. It's been waged in terms like jurisdictional boundaries and pursuant to Section 92 of the Constitution, so it's easy to get lost in abstractions. So I think it's worth taking another look at the downstream impacts of this legislation. The Impact Assessment Act has made the approval process so long and complicated that potential investors are simply going to take their money someplace else. Capital is mobile. It goes where it can get the highest and safest returns. And Canada is increasingly seen as a risky investment. In addition, a lot has been said lately about Canada's declining productivity. We now have the second lowest GDP per capita in the G7, and we're lagging far behind the United States. Economists, policymakers, and governments across Canada agree that this represents a crisis for our nation. It's a complex problem. There are some hard fixes for it, and there are some simpler ones. The way we see it, making it easier and more attractive to invest in our country is a no-brainer. But Ottawa is standing in the way of that, and on purpose with their Impact Assessment Act and other growth-killing policies. Alberta refuses to accept this managed decline in our prosperity. We refuse to accept their efforts to transform Canada from a safe harbor for investment into a black hole where capital is never seen again. That is what is at stake here, and that is why we're fighting it. And we're prepared to fight this time, the next time, and any time Ottawa thinks that they know what is best for our province. And now I would like to invite Minister Mickey Amery to share more details with us.
Well, thank you, Premier, and good afternoon. As the Premier mentioned, Alberta is referring the question of constitutionality of the amended Impact Assessment Act to the Court of Appeal of Alberta. We will argue that Alberta's position is that the Impact Assessment Act remains unconstitutional. Alberta published this question via an order in Council on November 20th and filed it with the Court of Appeal earlier today. This reference question is not the first time Alberta has taken action against the federal government's Impact Assessment Act. Alberta first referred the constitutionality of the Impact Assessment Act to the Court of Appeal in September of 2019. And in May 2022, The Court of Appeal ruled in Alberta's favor. The federal government appealed that decision to the Supreme Court of Canada. However, the Supreme Court of Canada also found that the Impact Assessment Act was largely unconstitutional. Both the Alberta Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed what Alberta has been saying all along. Primary jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resources rests with the provinces. Even after the federal government made amendments this spring, Alberta's position is that the Act remains unconstitutional, as it will still allow the federal government to interfere in projects well within provincial jurisdiction. Alberta has tried to cooperate with the federal government. We repeatedly requested that the federal government share details on their amendments before they were introduced, to no effect. Once the amendments were introduced, we reviewed them and contacted the federal government with our concerns and suggested amendments that would make the Act acceptable to Alberta. We gave the federal government 4 weeks to respond to our concerns, but they did not meaningfully address them. Alberta will not be ignored. Since the federal government is not willing to cooperate with us, we are taking them right back to court again. The courts agreed with our position in the first legal challenge of the Impact Assessment Act, and we're now prepared to fight as many times as necessary to protect the rights of Albertans. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from media. It'll be one question, one follow-up. Please see your name and outlet for the record. Start here in the room, then we're going to go to the phones. Graham, you had your hand up first. Go ahead.
Premier, the question, related question on jurisdiction when it comes to federal versus provincial. And I'm looking at your statement yesterday on Border Patrol. You're talking about Alberta will be acting urgently and decisively to patrol our own shared border with Montana. Now, international borders are a federal responsibility. Could you explain how Alberta would get involved in that?
Well, there's a couple things that we're contemplating. First of all, as you know, we promised in the last election, so well before the current crisis, that we were going to establish specialized sheriff units. So we have a specialized scan team. Those are shutting down drug houses. We've got a specialized team that is doing fugitive apprehension. We just had a major success in executing 1,000 warrants in conjunction with the RCMP and the EPS in Northern Alberta, where we've opened a second fugitive apprehension team in Southern Alberta. And we've been talking about having a special border patrol as well as a fentanyl apprehension team. And so I would imagine it would work very much the same way that our fugitive apprehension team has, that we would put resources together and work with our counterparts to make sure that if we're seeing any illegal activity happening, either coming into Canada or going on away from Canada into the United States, that we have the ability to apprehend those individuals and make sure that they see justice. I think that's what Albertans expect. I think it's what our American counterparts expect, and I think it's just good policy.
I'm sorry. Now, how does that work? Because it's a federal jurisdiction, the border. The RCMP is involved. You've got the Border Patrol, the federal agents. How does Alberta fit into that on a very basic sense? Do you have then sheriffs or somebody else at the border as well, checking people as they come across?
Well, I think what we discovered when the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline was canceled from the White House, that the federal jurisdiction over the border is actually quite narrow. There's a lot of land mass right after you cross the border that we're responsible for. We're responsible for policing. We're responsible for administration of justice. The RCMP is one of the entities that we have contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. Our sheriffs are another entity we've contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. And so those, I think it's incumbent upon us to work with our federal counterparts, our border security, the Montana officials to make sure that we're sharing information and that we're making sure that we're apprehending people who mean to do us harm on both sides of the border.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Brother, Western Standard. My question kind of builds on what Graham was saying. So you said the Alberta government will be moving to protected share border with Montana and alluded to sending the Alberta sheriffs to the border. What steps need to happen before all that is finalized?
There's a couple of, there's some things that we're working on. I mean, number one, yesterday when the premiers met with the Prime Minister, we all shared our concern about the threats being made about tariffs being applied on January the 20th, and expressed our support for doing something to address those very real concerns. The U.S. president-elect has mentioned that he's concerned about illegal migrants coming into the United States, and he's worried about the cross-border trade in drugs. We've been concerned about those things too. So what I would say is we've asked the federal government to develop a robust border security plan. I hope that they reveal that soon, and that we're prepared to put our resources that are under our control to service and making sure that we're protecting our part of the border, which borders Montana.
Okay, so you said enhancing border security would be good for the United States and Canada. How do you think this would be good for the United States and Canada?
I think one of the things I would say is that we have had a crisis with fentanyl overdoses causing death for a number of years now. It's part of the reason why we have a robust plan for not only addressing the criminal element, the organized crime and the smuggling that is associated with bringing those drugs in, shutting down drug houses, but it's also why we've taken a recovery-oriented system of care approach to get people off their deadly addictions and back onto the road to recovery. So we have been talking about this for a number of years. We know this is a serious problem. And so I think it's something that our people here in Alberta and in Canada wanted us to address. It's clearly a problem that the Americans want to address too. So we've got a shared interest in looking at that. We have also addressed the concerns that the federal government is bringing in too many people from too many different streams in a way that has been that is unsustainable for us to support. It's part of the reason why we've asked them to get a handle on the immigration flows. I would say that one of the stats that I've heard in the last short while over the last couple of days is that there's 4.9 million temporary work permits that are coming to an end. And I asked the Prime Minister, what is his plan for dealing with those number of individuals when they no longer have a legal right to work here? If I was the Americans, I'd be looking at that saying, what are you going to do about it? And so I want to see a plan around that, because I think Canadians and Albertans in particular are very concerned about that too. So I look at this as the Americans and the Canadians, we have a strong mutual interest in solving this problem. It's been pushed to the forefront because it's been tied to tariffs, but it means that we still have to solve it. We're solving it because it's a good thing to do.
Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, just on the same topic. Yeah. If the problem that we're trying to solve by taking this action is illegal drugs and migrants entering the United States from Canada, because that's the problem that Donald Trump has raised. Does that mean that in order to solve that problem, you are willing to send sheriffs to work under the authority of Montana law enforcement? Because that's who they would have to be working for to stem that flow in that direction.
Well, look, we've got a joint interest in trying to address the issues on the border. I would say that we've got a couple things happening. We've got cocaine and illegal drugs and we've got firearms, we've got human trafficking coming up from the U.S., we've got the precursor components going into fentanyl, and then we've also got those drugs going back down across the border. It's a joint effort that we need to have. We do joint operations all the time. I've given you a couple of examples of when we've done them. And so, yes, of course, we're going to reach out to our Montana counterparts and see how we can coordinate and share information. In fact, I believe Mike Ellis has already done the reach out with the Montana Attorney General's office, and I think that's just being a good neighbor. So I would say that we can have a collaboration across jurisdiction, and we should.
I'm going to try and double barrel it, but just to get more clarity, you're talking about actually having these sheriffs on the actual border or in and around in the rural areas near the border, and I'm wondering how much money you're willing to invest in something that is very clearly federal jurisdiction, international border.
I mean, I think we all watched what happened at Coots. Who do you think was responsible for the policing of what happened at Coots? That was under our jurisdiction. The RCMP are on contract to us. It was our obligation to make sure that that border got cleared. And so I don't think it's unusual to have the Alberta government take an interest through our various law enforcement mechanisms to make sure that we're addressing the illegal flows of whether it's people or drugs across the border. So I would say that this is very normal policing activity, to share information, share intelligence, and then if we have identified a serious problem, to work together collaboratively on both sides of the border to address it.
Jack, go ahead.
Jack Brown with the Canadian Press. Same topic, and then I have a different follow-up. I am wondering, so you've said that this has been like a concern of yours for well before the President-elect brought this up. Did you ever, I know tariffs aren't something you can control, but did you ever think of taking, I'm going to call it retaliatory action against the American government over that concern, and Trump kind of just beat us to it.
Tariffs hurt consumers. So if we put tariffs on American goods, it means our people pay more money. We have an inflation crisis right now. A lot of the goods coming across the border are food and other important staples. How it would be, to me, inconceivable that we can talk about addressing the inflation crisis by making goods for Canadians and Albertans more expensive. I think we are a long way from talking about that. I think we should look at the issues that are on the table. The issues that are on the table is our joint concern over policing. Let's make sure that we aren't having an illegal flow of criminals and drugs and illegal migrants coming across the border. I think if we address that, then we'll be able to get on to talking about the trade issues. So I'm certainly not putting retaliatory tariffs on the table. I think that just hurts Albertans.
And then follow up on topic question. So you said that we didn't get, well, obviously, like the federal government didn't respond or put any of your recommended amendments into the act. Did they give you an explanation why?
The only explanation that we received was that they felt that it addressed our concerns, but clearly for the reasons that the Premier articulated, some of the reasons that she listed in her portion of the earlier presentation, the things that we needed to see to make this more palatable did not make it into those considerations. We don't think that there was meaningful consultation. We don't think that any of the issues that we raised were addressed, and that's why we're here today.
Next question. Anyone? Global? Yeah.
Eric Bay, Global News. Premier, you just mentioned the flow of illegal goods across the border here. Do you have any data as to how much of these goods we're seeing across the Alberta-Montana border?
Well, we know it's a problem. We know that the vast majority of the illegal handguns and a large number of drugs and other paraphernalia are coming through the U.S. border. Once again, as the Premier said, we have our interests are aligned in making sure that we work together as good neighbors to quell these the illegal transport of guns and drugs across the border. We're going to do everything that we can to make sure that doesn't happen, and we'll continue to put the resources that we need to put forward to address those concerns. So that is in the interest of Albertans, it's in the interest of Canadians, and it's in the interest of our American neighbors. So all of our interests are aligned here.
Mm-hmm.
And just on this announcement, we've heard from some political analysts who say that we may be putting the cart before the horse in the sense that this bill won't come into effect for years now, and there may be a new government between then. I guess just why the push currently?
Well, I'm very reluctant to presuppose what might happen in the next election, but this is about protecting Albertans and also protecting Canadians. From every province is really impacted by this. The Impact Assessment Act really creates a disincentive to both domestic and foreign investment in this country. It hinders and harms our energy industry like nothing else. It will create unpredictability and instability in the market, and as you heard earlier today, companies are not interested in that type of those type of market conditions. So we're doing everything we can proactively to make sure that we get the decision that we're hoping for at the Court of Appeal. We think that we'll get that because, as we mentioned earlier, this isn't a remarkable change in terms of the amendments that were already struck down in the initial Court of Appeal and Supreme Court of Canada decision. We don't think that the amendments put forward did anything consequential to change the reasoning and the direction that we received from the Supreme Court of Canada, and that's why we're going back to court to get that affirmed once again.
Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
Michelle Belfontaine, CBC. Minister Amery, can you tell us how much this is going to cost? Have you guys put a dollar value on this particular court challenge?
Well, not quite yet. We are working with external counsel. We'll be doing it in collaboration with Alberta Justice. We'll be working together with the same legal team that moved forward in the initial challenge. We don't have a dollar figure because it's difficult to predict where this will go. We are certainly going to start, as we need to, with a reference question to the Alberta Court of Appeal. It depends on what Canada decides to do from there.
Do you have a larger, I know that Alberta has been quite aggressive in launching these particular appeals and reference cases. Do you have a total so far that you're able to tell us?
On this particular case?
Just on the number of challenges
We
that you
do.
have.
We've got 10 active challenges right now. I can give you a list of them here. We've got 4 reviews related to federal firearms ban, 2 reviews related to the Emergencies Act, 1 challenge related to the plastics ban, 1 on the Federal Fertilizer Act, 1 challenge to the carbon tax exemption on home heating oil, and of course the reference case on the Impact Assessment Act. Now these numbers typically change from time to time because things happen. We either resolve some, or we combine some, or others become certified, or many other reasons why we see these numbers fluctuate from time to time. But I will say this, the cost of moving these cases forward absolutely pales in comparison to the economic impact that we expect to see if this continues in this way.
Great. We have time for 2 more questions, everyone, so we're going to head to the phones. Operator, first caller, please.
Your first question comes from the line of Robert Buckle from Bloomberg News. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Premier. I wanted to ask you if you have any reason to believe that Trump's proposed tariffs would include oil and gas. There seems to be some confusion about whether that's the case or not. And you've met with the Prime Minister, so what have you heard?
I would say there's every reason to believe it applies across the board to every product. That's what he said. He said a 25% tariff with no exclusions, subject to us addressing the issues identified. And the issues that were clearly identified most recently were the border issues. You may have seen that the president-elect tweeted after a phone call with the Mexican president saying that they had a constructive conversation about stopping the flow of drugs and people across the Mexican border. That's the same kind of conversation that we need to have with the U.S. president. And so that's what I have said, that's what other premiers have said, and we're prepared to put our resources in place to make sure that we're addressing those issues. And I think if we do, then we can move to a constructive conversation about what the trade irritants are. I would say that leading with energy is probably our best point of leverage when we get into those negotiations. I was recently sent a note suggesting that a 25% tariff on Canadian oil and gas would raise American gas prices by $1.50 a gallon, which seems to work directly counter to the U.S. interests on being able to bring down the cost of transportation and other fuels. And so that's the case that we'll be making, is that the Americans now have their refineries in the Gulf Coast that are purposed to receive heavy oil, which is the particular brand of product that Canada has, that we have an integrated market where the largest exporter, or maybe put it the other way, they import the largest amount from Canada compared to any of the other jurisdictions that they deal with. They get more from us than Saudi Arabia and Mexico and Iraq combined. And that's my message when I reach out to my American counterparts is let's work together on the areas where we know that we mutually benefit. And I hope that will extend to all commodities and all products that go between our two borders. But I don't think we can even get to that conversation if we don't address the 2 issues that are sitting right in front of us. We've got to address the border security issues around fentanyl and around illegal migrants before we can even get to the second stage of the conversation.
Have you had any of your own representatives try to directly reach out to the Trump administration or the incoming Trump administration?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, we've got dozens of members of my caucus who have relationships that they've built up over many years. And we're using all of those reach outs. And in fact, the Prime Minister encouraged all of us to do that because they have a decentralized system of government in the United States. And so there's lots of different decision makers in lots of different roles who have different influences. And so all of the premiers have been encouraged to reach out to make our case to the Americans.
Okay, operator, we have time for one last question. So next question, please.
Next question comes from the line of Emmanuel Prince from Radio Canada. Please go ahead.
Hi, my first question is for the Premier. I was wondering if you got any backing from any other Premier in the country on this new judicial exercise, because I know Ontario and Saskatchewan were backing you last time. Quebec even said that they might back a second round of of judicial review. So did you have any conversation with anyone else about that?
I can confirm that we are consistently in contact with our counterparts all across the country. We began this case by filing the motion today in court. We expect to see some of our partners who joined in the last one join with this one. We know that private industry is also very interested in where we go with this, and we expect to see collaboration all across the country once this takes shape and the appropriate time comes.
Great. And my follow-up is for you, actually, Minister. Can you tell me what do you say that the federal government didn't do? Because they went back to the drawing board, they adopted new amendments to the Impact Assessment Act. They say that they did their job. So can you tell me precisely what do you mean by it's still unconstitutional?
Well, certainly. So the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that the original Impact Assessment Act was unconstitutional because it encroached upon provincial jurisdiction. That is to say that it encroached upon the powers provided to the provinces under Section 92, namely in the production, the development of their natural resources. The amendments to the Act, as Canada brought forward, did not meaningfully address the concerns that were raised in that particular decision. One of the examples of it is that the designated projects portion doesn't change really the definition or the scope or the analysis that the Supreme Court held was unconstitutional. It said that you could not legislate in the areas that fall within provincial jurisdiction. The changes don't make anything different when it comes to the Impact Assessment Act as the amended version stands today. We asked for a number of different things in addition to that. We asked that the federal government provide for clear timelines for project approval. They refused to do that. We asked them to provide us with the ability to substitute a provincial environmental assessment. They refused to do that. We asked them to remove the ministerial discretion on project approvals. They refused to do that. I think that's a real problem with the Impact Assessment Act as it stands today. To have a federal minister have the discretion to approve a project that falls within the jurisdiction of our provinces is inappropriate and irresponsible, and that's what prompted us to bring forward this reference.
Great, thanks everyone. That's all the time we have today.
Thanks everyone.